Greetings everyone, my name is Ryder, and today this video is a little different than some of the other ones that God normally has me post. This isn't a prophetic word or anything like that, but I wanted to come on and ask for your support with something that God has called me to do this summer. And, also it ties into what God had shown me back in 2020. If you've watched some of my videos in the past where I've shared, parts of my testimony, I've alluded to it in the past, but I've never been specific with what God showed me, but now is the appropriate time to share that. So I'll get right into it. I apologize in advance if I sound a little stuffy. The reason for that is because I am a little stuffy. I have a bit of a cold right now. I'm okay. I rested a lot, like Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I'm back to work today, on Monday, but yeah, still a little stuffy, still a little congested. It's getting better though. But with all that being said, I just want to get right into it. So back in 2020 was when my walk with the Lord began, and it was actually around the time of the COVID pandemic when we were in lockdown because of all the fear that was going on. And I remember, I wasn't saved at the time. I didn't have a relationship with God. I considered myself like an atheist or agnostic, but I was open to the idea of God if I had some sort of proof or something. Like I needed something. Um, and I remember during the pandemic, I was going through this phase where I'm like, oh, well, I'm spiritual, not religious. And I remember, I had some nights where I would go on the back porch to meditate because during this time in my life, I was living in Medford in a nice quiet home. We had a beautiful backyard, a beautiful back porch with a roof over the top. It was amazing. We had an old couch out there, it was wonderful. And I'd go out there a lot at night to meditate. And one night while I was out there, I don't know what came over me, but I just asked whoever was out there, what's gonna happen after I die? And immediately God showed me in a vision that I was being taken up to heaven. Like I was in a beam of white light and I was going up to heaven, and there were other people in beams of white light around me, and we were all going up together, and mine seemed to be in the middle and a little further out, like I was had helped lead or guide them in some way, maybe I had had a part in their spiritual walk with the Lord. um so that got me excited, because my whole life, given my past and everything, all I ever heard was people telling me that I was gonna burn in hell when I died. So, if I had asked that and I heard screaming and smoke and flames, I would have been like, well, yeah, and just walked away from it. But that got me curious to see God showing me that I was going up to heaven. That got me curious. That got my attention because I wasn't expecting that. So immediately afterwards, I asked God, you know, at the time I didn't know if it was God or not, but I asked again, what's the rest of my life gonna be like here on earth? And what God had showed me was that I was going to be performing and speaking in front of large groups of people. It was vague. I didn't know in what capacity I was going to be performing, what I was going to be doing, but I knew I was performing in some capacity and I was speaking in front of large groups of people. And that filled me with this hope and this joy and this excitement for the future that I never had before, because up until that point, even though I wasn't actively trying to take my own life, I was still having thoughts of suicide. And a couple years back, I was still in and out of the hospitals, and I had tried to kill myself on more than one occasion. So, I wasn't acting on that stuff at the time, but I still had those thoughts in the back of my head that hopelessness, that depression, what am I even getting up for? What's the point of all of this? This is all just depressing and monotonous, life just felt very dark and hopeless. Um, but that filled me with so much hope, just in that instant, that one night where this happened. And then throughout that summer, that late spring and throughout the summer, God confirmed this stuff to me through dreams and visions over and over. And I got, more pieces of the puzzle. He confirmed it to me in dreams and visions. But I still didn't have the whole picture. And I guess that brings me to like when I was saved, like, because a couple of years passed by, I wasn't living the best life, like I knew that God was real, I knew that He loved me, but I kind of had one foot in, one foot out, like I was still living in sin, I wasn't saved, I was still getting like high all the time, like, it was just a lot, and I wasn't living the way that God had wanted me to live. But then, like I fast forward a little bit to like the spring of 2022. It was the week leading up to Easter. That was the week I was saved. I had just moved back to Somerville. I've been at the same place at Somerville for a little over 3 years now. Thankfully, it's been the most stable housing I've had, like, I'd say since I was like a child, which is great. Um, but yeah, I was saved then. It was through a YouTube video by a street preacher named Joe Kirby. The video was called Three Signs You're Going to Hell. The first and the third didn't apply to me, but the second one was, if you think that you're a good person. I was like, well, yeah, I'm a good person, but then all the things that I've done throughout my life, all my sins just kind of hit me like a ton of bricks, and I was like, oh, like the fear of the Lord was like on me, and I was like, I don't want to go to hell, like I don't want to be like, like I don't want this fate, so I like immediately, like, I got on my knees and I prayed to God, and I just asked Him to help me and forgive me, and I accepted Jesus as my Savior because I knew I couldn't do it on my own and I needed Him. So, I was saved. Around this time, I had also started training at the circus studio. And I was starting to get into the Word of God, like reading my Bible. And then I realized just out of nowhere that, like, I was actually on the path that God wanted me to be on. That I was, actually doing what He had called me to do all those years ago, because I was starting to do circus arts. And I realized in one of the visions God showed me, I was with a group of traveling circus performers, and we were all Christians. We were traveling in the middle of nowhere. I don't know where we were, but it looked like some desert. We were traveling. I was dancing and playing a harp, and everybody was praising God, and everybody just seemed so happy, and I seemed so happy, and I was like, oh, God wanted me to do circus stuff. So when I realized that, like, I focused the next 3 years, like these past 3 years, I've just focused on growing as a Christian, reading the Word of God, going to church, going to Bible study, spending time in prayer. I need to be better about spending more time in prayer with God and not letting other hobbies and stuff get in the way of that. um, but I started doing that, and I started focusing on my circus training, doing the seer wheel. I had to stop that, but also taking up juggling, which has become my main discipline, and I can do a bunch of tricks with 3 balls, some stuff with 4. I can do 5. I'm trying to learn how to do 6 right now. It's getting better, but still tricky. And like, I worked at balancing things on my face. Now I have a world record for the longest time balancing a spoon on my nose by the grace of God. And I also took up balloon twisting, and that's a way that I make a bit of extra money at some local like carnivals and church events and stuff over the like spring and summer. Because that's when that kind of stuff is happening. Um, but yeah, like, it's just, like, I realized I was on the right track, and I just kind of threw myself into all of this. And that kind of brings me now to like what I'm doing. So I remember what God had shown me, over the years, and, has confirmed it and kind of filled in the gaps for me over time. Like the using like the creative arts and the performing as a way to, share the gospel with people. And I knew that that's what He wanted me to do, but it's a task that was too big for me to do alone. So I went online a couple of years ago, and I found an organization that is called TACO, which stands for Turkey Asia Creative Outreach. And they are an organization that, they use the creative arts, the performing arts, things like live music and dance. They've even had painters, they've had circus performers, like, like fire spinners, people that ride on the giant 6-foot unicycles. They've had jugglers, they've had clowns, like they've had, like people that do aerials, like the silks and the trapeze and stuff. They've had people with all kinds of different gifts. and they're able to use it for the glory of God. What they do is that they perform at different venues. Sometimes it's like at like school assemblies or just like street performing and stuff like that. And they use that as a way to get the crowd's attention, to do something kind for them, give them a show, show them the love of Christ. But then they also take it when they have this crowd's attention as an opportunity to share the gospel with them. We share the gospel with them, like they show them, they share like their personal testimonies. Like they ask if people want to learn more about Jesus, connect them with a local church, like have a follow up with them maybe at like a coffee shop, or like visit them at their home and check in, see how they're doing, like how their spiritual growth is going. um, that all that kind of follow-up stuff. So they use the creative arts, but after that comes the ministry portion, the sharing the gospel with folks, trying to get them connected with local churches, trying to disciple them, praying for people, laying your hands on them, praying for their healing if they need healing, all of that good stuff. And when I found that, like, I was so happy because I didn't even know if what God showed me, this group of like missionary circus performers. I'm like, is that even a thing? Does that even exist? Like, that doesn't seem like something that, Christians would do, because back then, it's like you have this, like in my brain, I had this idea of like a cookie cutter Christian, but I realized that that isn't me, and that's not all of God's children, like we're fearfully and wonderfully made. If we were all the same, like that would make life boring, But God's a creator, He's an artist, He's made all of us so unique, so there's going to be so many different kinds of people, and because of that, so many different kinds of Christians. Um, so I've been in contact with this group for the past couple of months. I sent them some of my like videos of me like juggling and stuff with the balloons, and the video of me breaking the world record for the longest time balancing a spoon on my nose. Like, I sent all of this over to them. Um, and like then like they met with me online, they talk with my pastor, and he told them about like what I've been doing and my spiritual gifts and stuff like that. And they let me on board, which I was really thankful for, because um, given the fact that I am a transgender man, there's a lot of missionary organizations. I guess what the pastor of my church told me is that like a lot of missionary organizations are like very conservative leaning and wouldn't even be open to having somebody like me on board. Like they would just not want me around. But this organization, they said that they are, like affirming and accepting, and they had talked about stuff like this like in the past, and they were like, well, what do we do if we have somebody that's LGBTQ that wants to join? What do we do if we have somebody that's trans? And they had decided that they would take it on a case-by-case basis. And when they met me and I shared my testimony with them, like a written version of it, I sent it all out to them in an email. Like they decided that they wanted to have me. They've connected with the team that I'll be on, and that brings me to I'm going to be joining them for a mission trip in July from the 11th to the 30th. It will be in Turkey. I don't know all the details of where we're going and stuff, but yeah, so that's the thing that's happening this summer. So it's going to be my first time going on tour, the first time doing anything like this, and kind of stepping into this door that God, by His grace, has opened for me. So, they have talked with the team that's based in Turkey. They're fine with having me on board and ready to support and, look out for me. The leaders that I spoke with, they did decide just to let everyone on the team know that I'm trans, just, so that they know, and also just for my protection, because we're going into countries like, like I don't know how everyone feels about that in Turkey, but I imagine it's for my own safety and own protection. They just told me not to share that with the people that we're reaching out to, that I can share any other part of my testimony, but just not the part about me being a transgender man. So yeah, and I agreed to that, because I said, like if it's gonna be more, if that's gonna put all the focus on me instead of on Jesus, then, that's not right. It would be better to just keep that, under wraps while I'm out there. But yeah, so Currently what's going on, is like this trip is planned, they got my flight booked, for the ticket and everything. Um, I'll be going out there, in July. Um, pretty much from like early mid-July to to almost the whole end of the month. And the reason why I'm posting this is because I wanted to ask for your support with this. I already have the support of the church that I go to. I made an announcement last Sunday at the church that I go to. Well, not last Sunday because that was Mother's Day, the Sunday beforehand. So at the 4th, I think, I made the announcement, and the pastor handed out copies of the letters that I wrote to folks that were attending the service that day. And one of the leaders there also said that she was going to try to connect, give like a copy of the letter and a photo of me to a church that she's still connected with that's in Chicago. And the reason for that is because they recently made the decision to be fully affirming of LGBTQ people, and what she thought of when it came to the fundraising part of the trip is, why don't we send this out to them and encourage them to support you and put their money where their mouth is? They say that they're affirming of trans people. So, here we have a trans person that loves God, that loves people, that wants to do God's work, that's going out to do missionary stuff, and could use the support. So why don't we do that? So she's helping me with that. And also, yeah, and that kind of brings me to why I'm here. I apologize if this has been very long-winded. I guess it's just a lot of a story. But yeah, so now why I'm here is I'm asking for your support with this as well. So I have the link for the letter that I wrote. It's a Google Doc. You can just click on the link and it'll open, and it shares all of this, but also, I'm asking for help, when it comes to this trip, like when it comes to prayer support and financial support. I think the prayer support is more important than anything else. Like we could really use just prayers for like my health, and also for the health and safety of all of us on the team going out to Turkey in July. My health stuff has improved a lot. It's still not 100%, but healing prayers is really appreciated. Prayers that God will give me the courage to, like carry this out, and just to like, not let me like, get like too scared or like, worry if I'm performing in front of an audience, because this is a lot of firsts. I've never done a ton of performing with the juggling in front of folks. I've never been on a mission trip before. I've done like street preaching and one-on-one evangelism and stuff, but never anything like this. And, I've actually never even been on a plane before. I've never been out of the country, so it's just a lot of firsts, and it's exciting, but also a little scary. And the final prayer is just that God will open up the hearts and the minds of the people in Turkey that we're trying to reach, because this is a predominantly Muslim country. I believe that it's 99.8% Muslim. So the majority of the people in this country do not know Jesus, do not have a personal relationship with them, and they're not saved. But God has been opening doors in this country. And I've heard more and more testimonies about people over there seeing Jesus in dreams and visions and coming to repentance and saving faith in Jesus, which is amazing. So God has been opening so many doors in this country, especially with young adults, with all the testimonies that I've been seeing and hearing online. So the prayer support is huge. Also, if you feel in your heart, like if you feel in your spirit the Lord is leading you to give towards this trip, like the link, the donor box link with the info about how to donate, is all in the letter that's linked in the description of this. Words. So yeah, you can make the donation on the website, and if you're doing it to support me going over there, then you put for and then my name, which is in the letter, Ryder Suma. You just put that in the comments. If you just want to give to this organization to support one of their outreaches, you can just do a general one, that's totally fine. Any bit of money helps. But also, if you're not able to give, that's totally fine. At least in the US, I know with the inflation, it's crazy. The economy is not doing the best. I know everything's expensive, but, if not, prayer support is huge. And also, just sharing this video or the letter with, people in your lives that also may want to support this, with the prayer support or the financial support or both, that would be a huge help. But with all that being said, thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story and about, like what God's doing in my life at this time. And, I appreciate any support, whether it's financial support or prayer support, whatever. But with all that being said, thank you so much. God bless you. And I hope that you have a wonderful rest of the day. Bye bye.